So good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our extended UNSD Brown Bags. So my name is Alexander Loschke, and I will be moderating this Brown Bag today together with my colleagues Sean Lovell and Panya Yu. We're really happy to have with us Aida Khalil and Stefano Di Candia from the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, who will present on a shiny application to track the progress on food and agriculture related SDG indicators. So Aida and Stefano agreed to present on this web-based tool, which was designed to automatize the assessment of progress made at the national, regional, and global level towards the achievement of the SDGs. The developed tool allows measuring the current status and trend of the SDG indicators and targets based on the FAO progress assessment methodology. The main objective of our Brown Bag today is to gather feedback on the developed application and proposed approach, and to discuss possible extensions and future developments, as well as opportunities for cooperation with other parts of the UN system. So let me introduce our speakers. We have with us Aida, who is a statistician with the Office of the Chief Statistician of FAO. In this role, she conducts research and methodological work in the field of data disaggregation and progress assessment of SDG indicators under FAO custodianship. Her areas of expertise include household and agricultural survey, design and implementation, and small area estimation. Stefano is a statistician with the Office of the Chief Statistician as well, of FAO, and he is contributing there to the work on data disaggregation and progress assessment of SDG indicators, and his areas of expertise includes survey data analysis, R programming, and small area estimations. As always, just a few practical things. So we will first hear the presentation, and then we can take questions and comments at the end. During the Q&A part, the Q&A part will also serve as an opportunity to explore possibilities for collaboration with our FAO colleagues on this matter. During the presentation, if you want, you can write comments and questions into the meeting chat at any time. But during the UNSD Brown Bags, we always encourage people to unmute themselves and ask the question themselves if possible. So please don't be shy, would be really nice, and it helps to create a nicer atmosphere. This UNSD Brown Bag is being recorded and will be made available in the UN Internal Training Resources Group on the global network at yammer.com/UNstat. And we would invite you to continue also the discussions there if you wish on this topic. So this is everything from me right now. I will now hand over to Aida. Aida, please go ahead.
Thank you, Alex. I'll share my screen. Okay, can you see my screen? Yes.
Sorry, looks fine.
Okay, thank you. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us to this event. I don't know. Okay. So the structure of today's webinar is as follows. So after a brief introduction on the topic, I will discuss the methodology that has been developed and is being used by the FAO to produce the assessment of progress towards the achievement of the SDGs, both at the indicator level and at target and goal level. Then I will leave the floor to my colleague Stefano, who will demonstrate the use of a shiny application that we have just released for the implementation of the discussed methodology. The version of the Shiny application that you will see today allows only to implement the approach that we will discuss on the SDG indicators that are under the custodianship of the FAO and all the indicators that monitor targets under Goal 2. But the idea is to extend this application and release a new version of the application towards the end of 2023. And this new version should allow to implement the methodology that we will see also on other SDG indicators, so to virtually any indicator included in the SDG monitoring framework. So let's start with a bit of background. With less than 7 years into the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the assessment of whether and when the SDG targets and goals will be achieved is becoming a pressing issue. In this context, we have, let's say, two main questions to address, namely, how far countries, regions, and the world stand from the achievement of SDG targets and goals, and how fast are countries, regions, and the world progressing towards the achievement of such targets and goals. From the statistical point of view, these two questions translate in two different statistical problems or measurement objectives. The first question, which corresponds to monitor the level of achievement of an SDG target, corresponds to evaluate the current status of an indicator as described by the latest available data, so the most recent value of the indicator. The second question instead, that allow to assess whether targets can or cannot be achieved by 2030, correspond to measure or forecast progress over time. So we have, let's say, two very simple statistical problems to address, but at the same time, we have also quite some challenges that needs to be taken into account and that international organizations need to consider when developing an assessment approach. The first problem, and I would say the most important one, is that only a minority of targets, about the 30%, have a clear numerical benchmark set in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So only in very few cases we have, let's say, a fixed value that SDG indicators should reach by 2030. But we need to find methods that can allow to produce an assessment of progress also in absence of, let's say, this clear reference in the SDG agenda. In addition, many of the SDG indicators in the global monitoring framework are new indicators, meaning indicators that were designed, let's say, specifically to monitor the targets in the 2030 agenda. So for all these indicators, we have very short time series with very few data points. And this, of course, limits the options in terms of methods that we can use to produce the assessment. Finally, many targets combine multiple and complementary policy objectives. This means that many of the targets in the 2030 agenda are monitored by two or more indicators. So here we have, let's say, an issue in terms of aggregation. So how to produce an assessment first at the indicator level, but then also at the target and goal level. So let's say these are all the main problems that need to be considered in developing a methodology for the assessment of SDG progress. In this respect, let's say the FAO has done a lot of work to develop a standardized statistical methodology to produce let's say, a comparable assessment for all the indicators under its custodianship. And this methodology is now used on an annual basis since 2019 for the production of the FAO SDG Progress Assessment Report, which includes a statistical progress assessment and also a statistical annex presenting the methodology in detail. In past years, the FAO has also been part of the EIG SDG task force on the SDG progress chart that was developed with the idea of improving the consistency among, let's say, the different assessment approaches used by different international organizations. In the slide, you can find a link to the latest version of the FAO SDG Progress Report. Now we are working at a new version of the report that will be launched in September 2023 and will become available through FAO website. So let's pass to methodological, let's say, theoretical part of this webinar. As said in the introduction, when assessing the progress towards the achievement of the SDG, we have to distinguish between two main statistical problems. On the one hand, we have the assessment of the current status, so the current position of SDG indicators. And on the other hand, we have the problem of assessing the trend of SDG indicators, so how they are moving over time. For what concerns the first problem, we need to assess how close the latest available value of an indicator is to the ideal value that should be reached by 2030. And this is straightforward when the ideal value is set in the formulation of the agenda. So in all these cases, so when we have a clear numerical benchmark to be achieved by 2030, we use a normalized measure of distance with respect to the target. So let's say it's a simple distance measure divided by the maximum theoretical distance that can be observed for a given indicator. And this is done basically to rescale all the assessment for any possible indicator in a scale between 0 and 1. It should be noted that for all indicators that are expressed as proportion, the normalized distance is simply equal to a standard distance or difference between the value of the indicator and the value of the target that should be reached. For the implementation of this assessment methodology, we only need information on the current value of the indicator and the value of the target that should be achieved. And so let's say this is why such a simple approach was used, because using a simple approach allows to deal also with time series with one data point or like very few data points. After computing the distance is categorized into current status categories that indicates the degree of closeness to the target. Of course, a similar approach can only be applied when we have a numerical benchmark to be achieved, so only in the 30% of the cases. In all let's say, remainder of the cases, we need to find a solution, so find alternative methods that can be used to produce an assessment. In this respect, many international organizations have adopted solutions that allow to set so-called statistical targets, so targets that are not, let's say, set by policymakers, but are instead determined by, for example, the characteristics of the indicator, so through expert judgments or also by looking at the overall distribution of the indicators. For example, in some cases, targets have been set by looking at worst or best performing countries. In this respect, FAO position is slightly different in the sense that we consider setting targets as the role of policymakers more than statisticians. And also, we think that, for example, setting targets by looking at best or worst performing countries completely disregards the, let's say, country specificities and also like the starting point of countries in the development process. So in absence of a political target, let's say, we don't set any statistical target, but we simply assess the worldwide distribution of the indicator. So we associate each country to the corresponding quintile computed on the distribution of the indicator based only on country level data. So like to compute the quintiles, we first exclude regional and global level aggregates, and then we determine the quintiles only using country values. So this is what we do in absence of a numerical target. Also, for what concerns the trend, we need to distinguish between indicators with numerical and without numerical target. In this case, we also have an additional issue. So as I mentioned at the beginning, many of the SDG indicators are new, so we have very short time series. Very often with only 2 or 3 data points. So we have to use like very simple trend assessment techniques. We cannot use, let's say, sophisticated approaches, for example, smoothing techniques or other time series methods. And in this respect, let's say that international organizations tend to use more or less the same approach. So, for example, the FAO, the Eurostat, the Sustainable Development Solution Network, and in line with what is done by UNSD, assess the trend by comparing the actual growth that is shown by SDG indicators with the growth that would be required to reach targets by 2030. Of course, this can be done only, again, when we have a numerical target to be reached by 2030. In particular, the FAO, in line with what is done by UNSD for the global SDG progress chart, use a geometric growth function to compare the actual growth with the required growth, which leads to the formula reported in this slide. So the trend is assessed by computing the so-called compound ratio, which is given by the ratio between the actual compound annual growth rate and the required compound annual growth rate, where for the computation of the compound growth rate, we only need the value of the indicator for country I in the current year T, and the value of the indicator in country I for the baseline year. So these are the two elements of the time series that we need for the implementation of this method. And of course, at the denominator, to compute, let's say, the required growth, we need the value of the target that should be reached by 2030. So, like with only these 3 elements, we can produce a trend assessment. And let's say that a value of the CR close to 1 indicates that a given country or a region or the world is on track to reach a specific target. After computing the CR, these values are again, as done for the distance, categorized into classes that indicate the degree of progress towards or deterioration from the target. The comparison between the actual growth and the required growth is only possible when we have a clear numerical benchmark to be reached by 2030. In other cases, we are only able to compute the numerator of this formula, and that's what we do. So we produce the actual compound annual growth rate, so the one that is actually observed on the data, and we categorize this into classes, which are assessed against the normative direction of the indicator. So each SDG indicator, depending on the target that it's monitoring, should either increase or decrease. So the actual compound annual growth rate is assessed against this normative direction. Okay, so this is, in summary, what we do to perform the assessment at the indicator level. Now, we have another issue. So after producing the the assessment at the indicator level, we have to find an approach that allows to aggregate the assessment first at target and goal level. So as you certainly know, like for each target, for many targets, we have multiple indicators, and these indicators are different, are expressed in different unit of measure, have different, let's say, scale of variations. So we cannot simply aggregate them by, for example, averaging the distance value or averaging the values of the CR or the actual compound growth rate. But we need to rescale this measure into a common scale, let's say, and then perform the aggregation. In this respect, while for the assessment of progress at the indicator level, there is a sort of harmonization at the international level, for what concerns the assessment of progress at target and goal level, we still don't have, let's say, clear guidelines and methodologies that are adopted by all international organizations. So to fill this gap, the FAO has proposed a simple, let's say, approach that I will briefly show now, and then Stefano will show through examples with the Shiny app. The approach was developed at the end of 2022 and will be used for the first time this year for the new version of the FAO SDG Progress Report. So the proposed methodology is implemented in 3 simple steps. The first step is basically what we have seen in the first part of the presentation. So at step 1, we produce the assessment at indicator level with the methods that have been discussed. So the assessment means the current status and trend assessment. At step 2, the estimated progress values in terms of current status and trend are inserted into a scoring function that linearly normalizes the values of the current status and the trend on a continuous scale from 0 to 4. So all the assessment for all the indicators is brought into a scale from 0 to 4. After producing a score for the trend and the current status of each SDG indicators, these scores are first aggregated at target level and then at goal level. And the aggregation first at target and then at goal level is done to give first equal weight to all indicators included under a given target, and then, let's say, equal weight to all targets included under a given goal. So let's briefly see the implementation of each of these 3 steps. So in step 1, we basically implement the methodology that was discussed earlier. So we distinguish between indicators with a fixed numerical target and without a fixed numerical target. For indicators with a fixed numerical target, we assess the trend with the compound ratio, and we assess the current status using the normalized distance to the target. For indicators without a fixed numerical target, instead we looked at the actual growth from the baseline year. And this for the trend, and for the current status, we produce the quintiles. Then we go to this step 2, that is the normalization step, where both for the current status and then in the next slide you will see for the trend, we normalize the measure, let's say, of progress that we have produced into a range between 0 and 4. So for example, for indicators with a numerical target, we assess the current status producing a distance measure indicated with D in the formula. This distance measure is inserted into the scoring, let's say, the min-max function that you see in this slide, the first one, to produce a score in between 0 and 4, where the score 0, let's say, indicates the worst possible result, and the score 4 indicates the best possible results. As done for the values of the distance, the values of the scores are then categorized into classes that allow, let's say, to perform a summary assessment. When instead we don't have a numerical yardstick, as we said, we produce the quintiles. And to convert quintiles into a score from 0 to 4, we also need to look at the normative direction of the indicator. So if the indicator should decrease over time, we use the first formula, while if the indicator should increase over time, we use the second formula, with the objective of always obtaining a score in between 0 to 4, with 0 indicating the worst possible result and 4 the best possible result. The same is done for the trend. So without repeating what's said in the previous slide, here we have a linearization approach based on the min-max function. The sign of the function changes depending on the normative direction of the indicator if we have an indicator without a numerical yardstick, while we can always use the first formula when we have indicators with a numerical yardstick. After producing a score for each indicator under a given target or goal, we can go to the aggregation part. So for targets monitored only by one indicator, the score of the indicator coincides with the score of the target. While for targets monitored by more than one indicator, the scores are aggregated using a simple arithmetic mean into a target level score. After producing the target level score, again using an arithmetic mean, we produce a goal level score. And these scores are categorized into the classes reported in the slide. So going from a score equal to 4 that indicates that the target or the goal has been achieved, until a score included between 0 and 1 that indicates the maximum possible, let's say, deterioration away from the target or the maximum distance from the target. So this is all for what concerns the, let's say, the methodology that we use to assess SDG progress. I leave now the floor to Stefano that will show the Shiny app. You can access the Shiny app from a link reported in this slide, and the slide, I guess, will be circulated after this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Aida. I'll share my screen. Let's begin by saying where to find the Shiny application. Starting from the FAO page, click on Statistics in the toolbar at the top. Then click on the first option from the drop-down menu called Statistics. And then finally, click the second item of the section Data Centers. This is the FAO SDG Indicators page. And from here, the application is accessible from the Highlights section, second item. By clicking on it, users are redirected to the web application. This is the initial view, where using the toolbar at the top, users can move between 4 pages. The home page, set as the default, contains a brief description of the tool and its functionality. In addition, users can access to documents by using these two hyperlinks, where the first provides a step-by-step guide on how to use the tool, while the second provides details on the methodologies used for the progress assessment. The indicator level assessment page, as the name suggests, implements the progress assessment at indicator level. The first step is to select the SDG indicator of interest from the related drop-down menu. As you may notice, and as it was already mentioned in the presentation by Aida, the available options include only indicators under FAO's custodianship. As an example, let's choose indicator 211, measuring the prevalence of undernourishment in a given population. This indicator belongs to target 2.1, which aims to end hunger by 2030. After the selection of the SDG indicator, different objects appear in the page. On the right-hand side, a section with information on the indicator characteristics relevant for the assessments, which are target value equal to 0%, but it is operationalized with a value of 2.5% to account for measurement errors and to allow the compound ratio computation. Normative direction, indicator 211 should decrease. Current status methodology, simple distance from the target, given that the indicator has a numerical target, and given that the indicator is a proportion, making the distance already normalized in the range 0, 1. And finally, trend methodology, which will be the ratio between actual and required growth. On the left-hand side, we have 3 new drop-down menu, which allow to select the baseline, current, and target year to be used for the trend and current status assessment. At the center, we have a panel with 4 tabs. The first one, called Input, set as the default, is where the users can choose between producing the assessment using the official SDG data with the possibility of downloading it as an Excel file, or producing the assessment loading customized data following the instructions presented, with the possibility of changing the target value and optionally combining the customized data with the official SDG data. In this case, let's proceed with option 1 by clicking on the associated Produce the Assessment button and then move to the next tab. For the next example, we will consider option 2. Table, the table tab is where the results are displayed in tabular format with details of the criteria used to assess the current status and the trend. Specifically, the results table provides information on the M49 code and name of the region or country, the baseline year, which was left unchanged to the default value 2015, the corresponding baseline value, the last or current year, which has 2023 as default value. But as you may notice, the column contains years different from 2023. This is because in the data, no region or country has a 2023 value, and therefore the current year is set equal to the greatest available year for each country. Specifically in this case, it will be 2021 for regions and 2020 for countries. Then we have the corresponding last year value, the target year, which was also left unchanged to the default value 2030, the target value, the distance value from the target, and the associated symbol category, and finally the compound ratio value and the associated symbol category. By changing the choice of any of these 3 drop-down menu, the results are updated. For example, let's set the baseline year equal to 2016, and let's also change the target year to 2025. As you can see, the results are updated, modified accordingly. The next tab, called Maps, provides a graphical representation of the results shown in the previous tab through the use of maps of the two assessment measures. The maps can be zoomed in, and by hovering over a country, its name, the category, and the time periods considered for the assessment are displayed. Finally, last tab is called Download Results, and is where the results can be downloaded in terms of a Word document containing the information related to the indicator assessment, the maps, and also the table. If we open this file, we can see that right at the beginning, we have all the necessary info about the assessment for the considered indicator, then the two maps, and finally the entire table. The table and the maps can be also downloaded separately. An Excel file for the results table, and image files for the maps. For all the other indicators, we have the same layout, and by following the same steps just illustrated, it is possible to obtain their assessment results. The main difference, as mentioned in the slides, between the various indicators might be the assessment methodology used. So as an example, let's consider indicator 1511, which measures forest area as a percentage of total land area. It has not a clear numerical benchmark. And therefore, the current status is based on the quintiles distribution, which means that the quintiles of the indicator values for the selected current year are used to create cutoff points used to divide the range of values into 5 equal parts, into 5 equal groups, from the lowest fifth to the highest fifth. While the trend methodology is based on the actual growth. So as I said, in this case, let's proceed with option 2 by uploading the following Excel file, which at the end corresponds with the official dataset for this indicator, keeping just the value series of this country, Albania, just as a random example. The columns that should be in the input should be included in the input file are the ones highlighted in yellow. All the others columns will not be taken into consideration. After uploading the file, we can click on the related Produce the Assessment button and move to the next tab, where details of the assessments are provided beside the results table. And in particular, for the current status, the quintiles obtained are shown. In this case, as you can see, they are missing because the values distribution is composed of just one element. But if we go back to the input tab and check the box for combining the input file and the official data, the current status assessment is performed for the country that was in the Excel in the input file, and the other countries that were in the official data. All of the remaining parts are the same to what we have already seen. So the maps in this case will refer to the methodologies used for this indicator, which means the 5 groups defined by the quintiles for the current status assessment and the actual growth for the trend assessment. And then the final tab can be used to download all of the results. Now we can move to the next page. The target level assessment page is similar to the previous one, at least in this initial view. Users can select the SDG target of interest from the related drop-down menu. The available options include only targets of goal 2. Most of the indicators within this goal are under FAO's custodianship, with the exception of the indicators in target 2.2, indicator 2A2 in target 2.A, and indicator 2B1 in target 2.B. Let's choose as an example target 2.1, which contains indicators 211 and 212. After the selection, additional objects appear in the page. On the left, 2 drop-down menu, which allow to select the baseline and the current year to be used for the trend and current status assessment. And at the center, a panel with 2 tabs, where the first one, called Input, set as the default, is where users as first step can view the entire data available for the selected target, or view a subset of the data, filtering by indicator, country or region name, value, and time period. Furthermore, the values of the indicators can be modified by double-clicking on a specific cell of the value column. The second optional step consists in loading a customized file following the instructions presented, which will be automatically merged with the official data displayed above, keeping the data of the input file in case of duplications. After this process of viewing and or editing the data, or loading a customized input data file, users can click on the button Produce the Assessment to generate the content displayed in the remaining tab, Results, which is divided in 2 subpanels, Table and Plots, where in the first one, the assessment results are shown in tabular format, with details of the criteria used to assess the current status and trend. Specifically, the results table provides information on the M49 code, the name of the region or country, the score value and category of the current status, and the score value and category of the trend. A complete version of the table containing the results at target and indicator level can be downloaded by clicking on this button. The other subpanel provides a graphical representation of the results after selecting a specific country or region. The plot shows the current status and trend results, first at target level and then at each indicator level. By hovering on the bars, the score and the associated category are shown. Finally, the plot can be downloaded by clicking on the camera icon. The last page, goal level assessment page, is structured in exactly the same way of the previous page. The only difference is that it is required to click on this button, show SDG goal to data, to display the data and all the tabs of the page. Therefore, after viewing and editing and optionally loading the customized data, we can produce the assessment by clicking on the related button and get the tabular representation of the results, which can be also downloaded, or we can get the graphical representation of the results. That's it from my side. Thanks a lot for your attention. I'll give back the floor to Alex for the remaining part of this meeting.
Thanks so much, Aida and Stefano, for this presentation and for showing this tool to us. So I would like to open now the floor for questions and comments. So please just raise your hand, switch on your camera if you wish, and then ask the question. So there were also a couple of comments already in the meeting chat, and maybe we can start with that, trying to break the ice a little bit, and see whether you can answer some of those questions. So there was a suggestion by Adam. Adam, you don't want to come in quickly and explain your comment yourself? Thanks.
Yeah. Hello, colleagues. Thank you, Alex. Good to see you again, and good to thank you, colleagues from FAO, for the good presentation. Yeah. So basically, when the Candia Stefano was showing the app, there was a drop down option where you can select the indicator like 2.11, 2.22, and my suggestion was to add a kind of summary or kind of the main point of the description of that indicator for easy reference. Yeah, so that's what the point. Same also applied to the target at the target level, a very brief summary of what the target is talking to. Yeah, that would be great. Yeah. Thank you, Alex, and thank you, colleagues.
Thank you. This is a good point. We will add it.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Yeah, I also had a comment when you presented it regarding the table. So in the maps, you have basically a color representation of the level of achievement of a indicator or a target, right? And I was wondering if you could also color code the achievement level in the table. So I'm a more visually oriented person, so I would just look for the colors, right, instead of the symbols. But to have both maybe would be good, because yeah. And then I see Panya has his hand up. Panya, come in.
Yeah, no, first of all, thank you for very detailed presentation, both on the methodology and the demonstration. I have one quick question about the choice of using quintiles for indicators that do not have numerical targets. I think, that I know that the solution to the problem has to deal with the kind of information architecture of the indicators themselves, right? 2/3 of which don't have the values. But you mentioned in the methodology part, Aida, that you try to avoid picking the best performing countries as targets because of the different development stages of the countries. But by replacing that with the quintiles, I feel like you fall into the same potential issue in that by doing quintiles, the top quintile is always going to be classified as meeting the target. And when you try to then aggregate the scores to the target and goal level, they are going to be overweight, right? Because 2/3 of the indicators do not have numerical values. So the top quintile for those indicators are going to be overweight. And I feel that if this methodology is generalized for all the goals and for all the targets, there may be a potential risk of overstating the progress for the SDG because of that. Yeah, just a thought on this, and maybe to potentially solve the problem of the different development stages of countries, have you thought of another potential option of, let's say, looking at the statuses of countries based on their income groups, right? High income, middle income, low income, and then kind of do a weighted average of the score instead of doing the quintiles. Yeah, that's something that stood out to me from the methodology. Thank you.
Thank you, Panya. Can I take this question, or you want to collect
No,
it?
no,
Okay.
please go ahead.
So actually, like you raise a good point, but there are, let's say, some nuances in the sense that normally when you aggregate the assessment at target level, so when you look at targets, you either have a target or not. So for the aggregation at target level, there's no issue in the sense that either all indicators have a numerical yardstick or they all don't. So there's no risk of, let's say, overestimating the progress in this respect. The issue that you mentioned is more at a goal level, no, where you will have very few indicators with a numerical yardstick, and the majority of them without it. Let's say that looking at the setting targets by income groups could be a solution, but not a generalized solution that you can apply in any case, because income levels could be relevant to some of the, let's say, phenomena that are quantified through SDG indicators, but not to many others. Like, for example, for all the indicators where you are monitoring sustainability, or like, I don't know, the preservation of mountains ecosystem or water ecosystem, income may not be the right discriminating factor. But certainly, like the issue that you raised, it's valid. Basically, looking at the quintile is, in our perspective, is as saying, okay, we don't say that we like, the fifth quintile is better by definition, no? Because but it's simply as providing a picture of the current situation without associating to it a judgment. But it's true that then when you go and aggregate at goal level, you may have issues that you have described.
Thanks. You wanted to say something more? So.
No, perhaps because I saw a question in the chat that I'm not sure that has been completely addressed during the presentation. The one from Asfandyar Khan. I don't know, Asfandyar, if you think your question has been addressed or you want to see an example.
Yeah, so actually, no, thank you very much, Aida and Stefano, for the very nice presentation. So actually, my comment was more from, the as to how we go from the formula that you showed us to the final output that Stefano showed us. So what are the in between steps, right? So that would be, for a people who are entirely new to this exercise, right? So for them it will be if there is a practical example and guidance on how you go about, implementing those formula using the inputs, and then going towards the final output, right?
Okay.
So I believe that would be very nice to have, sort of practical guidance stepwise.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so in the home page of the Shiny app, there's a sort of downloadable file where the methodology is described, and there are some examples. If you want, I can also show one right now through the slide. Then, okay, just let me go back to the slide where we have these formulas. Like, for example, let's take the first min-max formula, and let's apply to a value of the distance. So when we assess the current status, we produce a distance measure that goes from 0 to 1, potentially, no? So let's assume that we have, I don't know, a distance value equal to 0.26. Okay, so the class is this one. So in this case, we would have that. Let's look at the denominator. Max D, so the maximum distance in this class is 0.40. So 0.40 here minus 0.20 times the values of the distance that I've observed minus here I have again min D, so it's 0.20 plus max S. So here for the numerator and this term, I have to look at the score. So the corresponding scores are 2 and 3. So max S is 3 and min S is 2. So I replace this value here and I obtain a score between, in this case, between 2 and 3.
All right. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, maybe in the documentation you could also just give a very practical example how something is calculated. Sometimes people get a little bit lost in the formulas, but when they see a practical example, I think they sometimes understand it better. I have one more question, and before maybe people drop out, is how would it be possible to collaborate with you guys on this Shiny app and include more targets and goals and indicators which are not under the custodianship of FAO? Yeah, so other organizations in the UN system who are the custodians for other ranges of indicators.
I think so. We would need to organize, let's say, bilateral exchanges between the organization, seeing, let's say, the characteristics of the indicators, no? Because we have seen that there are different methodologies depending on, first of all, presence or absence of a target. Then here, I mean, we had a limited space, but also like we need to distinguish between the specific characteristics of the indicators, such as, for example, if they are expressed as totals, proportions, or scores. So we would need basically to assess the characteristics of the indicators. And if they are fine, let's say, with adopting the FAO methodology for the assessment of progress, based on the requirements of their indicators, we could expand the application also to produce the assessment. So we could either think of joint work or like a sort of commission of the work with some details on the characteristics of the indicators.
Yeah, I think there was also something in the chat. Let me just quickly check. Daniel had a question. Daniel, you want to come in or shall I read it out?
Yeah, it's okay. I just wanted to know if you already have like a cautionary note on the methodology, on the constraints. What are they? You know, if somebody wants to start looking at this, what are the things that they need to look at? You know, as you already classified, the ones with target, the ones we have with not known targets per se. So, is there something that you have on that?
So let's see. I think the main constraints are as I was mentioning, the fact that ideally the progress assessment would be easier if we would have, you know, targets to move towards. So in absence of targets, we can only somehow provide the picture of the situation, but not actually say if we are like moving towards or like I mean, if we are going in the right direction and with the right speed. The challenge for one challenge, for example, a big challenge is the length of time series. So if you don't have at least 2 data points in the time series of the indicator, you cannot implement the trend assessment methodology that has been discussed. So that's the main challenge or limitation. Plus, for example, for indicators that are not expressed as continuous variables, such as, for example, totals, proportions, ratios. So for all indicators that are not in the standard formats, like, for example, scores, we cannot use this approach. So we need ad hoc approaches to assess, especially the trend. Another issue is, for example, when we work with quintiles. So if you have indicators expressed as counts, such as, for example, number of this or that in a country, like number of genetic resources stored like securely, for example, when you go at the world level or at the regional level, the count will be simply the sum of the counts that are observed at country level. So you cannot anymore classify it in one of the quintiles. So this is another challenge that comes to my mind.
Thanks so much. So we're already
Thank
a
you.
little bit sorry, Daniel, you wanted to react on it?
No, just say thank you.
Okay, thanks. So we are already a little bit over time. I just didn't want to cut the conversation or discussion short. But I guess now we are ready to wrap up. I just wanted to say, if you have additional comments, questions, and so on, please reach out to our colleagues at FAO, Stefano, Aida. And yeah, let them know what comments, what suggestions you might have, and I think this is really helpful. And then if you want to collaborate with them also, yeah, please reach out to them, and then we will see how this will progress. Just one last request to everyone. So please, if you could now turn on your camera, switch on your mics. Now is the moment, and please join me to give a big round of applause to Stefano and Aida for this presentation. Thank you. Please join me.
Thank you both.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thanks you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, please join us next time when we organize a Global Network webinar or a extended UNSD Brown Bag. They are usually announced in our newsletters or via email. So if you want to receive the email communications, if you want to be put on the mailing list, please contact us. We put you on there. And yeah, this is all. See you next time. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
It was
Bye.
a pleasure.
Thank you all. Bye.